Thank you, Madam President. Last year, something happened in Washington, D.C. that most of us in the Senate and most Americans would like to see more of. The President and the Republican House of Representatives and a bipartisan group here in the Senate worked together to reform the student loan program. It's a lot of money, affects a lot of students. Every year, the federal government loans about $100 billion to students who attend colleges and universities around this country. We have 6,000 of those higher education institutions. In addition to that, in addition to those loans, which of course students pay back, the federal government grants about $33 or $34 billion each year in Pell Grants of up to $5,600, which students may keep. So last year, we were in this usual pattern that has developed around the United States Congress of student loans becoming a semi-annual political stunt. Every 2 years before an election, one party or the other would show up with a student loan proposal to try to appeal to students in hoping that students and others in America would reward them with their votes. Last year, we changed that for new student loans because the President and the Republican House of Representatives and the Democratic Senate in a bipartisan way worked together to reform the student loan program by taking a market-priced system, put it on top of the $100 billion or so that we loan every year, and said to the students, we'll give you the benefit of that. You don't have to wait for Congress to engage in its semi-annual political stunt so that you'll know what your loan is. And the result of that, Madam President, was that for undergraduate loans for students, which are 85% of all the loans, because the interest rate at the time was lower, we were able to cut in half the interest rate on student loans for undergraduate students in America without raising taxes and without raising the debt. That result got an overwhelming bipartisan support here in the Senate. It had the strong support of the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, the HELP Committee, Senator Harkin. I support it, as did many others. And it worked the way the Senate is supposed to work. I mean, this body is for the purpose of taking an important issue, which student loans is, having an extended debate on it, which we did, until we came to a consensus, which we did, and then coming to a result that the American people of which they could approve. And we did that as well. Now this week, we're seeing something entirely different. Senate Democrats would interrupt a serious discussion that's going on in the Senate Education Committee about reauthorizing the Higher Education Act, which was first enacted in 1965. Senator Harkin is our chairman, the senator from Iowa. I'm the ranking Republican on that committee. We've had 10 hearings. We've been hard at work. We've had some terrific testimony, some very good ideas about the student loan program, about a whole variety of issues affecting higher education. And we're doing what you're supposed to do in the United States Senate. We're trying to come to a conclusion so that we can recommend in a bipartisan way to this full body what to do about higher education for the next several years, including student loans. Yet, all of a sudden we hear that Senate Democrats want to show up on the floor with a partisan political stunt that interrupts the work of the Senate Education Committee. And here's what they would do. They would raise individual income taxes, they would raise the debt, and they would, based upon data from the Congressional Research Service, give some former students with old student loans a $1 a day federal subsidy to pay off their loan. Now let me go back over the terms of this proposal just so everybody has it in mind. This is the main thing, $1 a day. That's the benefit. Doesn't do anything for current students, doesn't do anything for new students. For some former students, according to the Congressional Budget Office, maybe half the loans, the taxpayers will give them $1 a day to help pay off their student loans. Now, along with that, we increased the national debt, the federal debt, by up to $420 billion. That debt is out of control to begin with. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that over the next 10 years, we're going to go from something over $200 billion to close to $800 billion. We'll be spending in 10 years more on our interest on our national debt than we will be on national defense. Yet, for this political stunt, we're going to run that up another $420 billion, maybe. That's close to $500 billion. That's not all. To pay for all this, we're going to raise individual income taxes by $72 billion. Now, this is a familiar proposal. This is the class warfare tax increase that the Senate has rejected 8 times. There's nobody in this Senate that thinks this will pass the Senate the 9th time it's brought up. So it's only brought up, it's only interrupting what we're doing in our committee for a partisan political stunt. So we've raised the debt, we're going to increase taxes. For what? Well, to help students pay off their loans. So they get $1 a day to pay off what loan? Well, 85% of the student loans, and there are a lot of them, there are $1 trillion of outstanding student loans because we have a lot of students, and we're a big country, and we have 6,000 colleges and universities. But 85% of the undergraduate loans are $21,600 on the average. That's right. These are 1 years, or some students go for 2 years to community colleges. Some get a 4-year degree. But for the 85% of the student loans that are undergraduate loans, this is the average debt. It's not $300,000, it's not $200,000, it's not $100,000, it's $21,600. Now, of those undergraduate loans, this is the average debt for a federal student loan. If you have a 4-year degree from the University of Tennessee or the University of California or Michigan, wherever you are, and you borrowed money to go to school, this is your average debt, $27,300 when you graduate for a 4-year college degree. It's about the same for a new car loan. And sometimes students get their car loan before they get their car. So to get a sense of how big a burden this loan is, for the average student with a 4-year degree, it's the same as a car loan. I suspect if we're going to have $1 a day taxpayer subsidy to pay off a $27,000 student loan to go to college, next thing you know, the Democrats are going to show up during the election year and say, well, let's have $1 a day to help people pay off their $27,000 car loan. At least we know that the day you drive your car off the lot, it starts depreciating. And what do we know about the college education? Here's what we know about it. That if you have a 4-year degree according to the College Board, that's worth to you $1 million in increased earnings during your lifetime. That's according to the College Board. No one really contradicts this. I saw a very good article by New York Times economists a couple of weeks ago that had a little different number. They said they were using a net negative of a half $500,000 after you deduct the costs of going to college, but $500,000 to $1 million in increased earnings. Can you think of a better investment than $27,000 to earn $1 million over your lifetime? That's what a college degree does. That's what a college degree does. And what our friends on the other side are saying is we need to raise the debt and raise taxes to help college students who are graduates and who are going to be earning $1 million more over their lifetime pay off a $27,000 loan. Madam President, college students don't need, college students don't need a $1 a day federal taxpayer subsidy to pay off a $27,000 student loan, which is the average loan for a 4-year college degree. They need a job. They need a job. And Republicans are prepared, if this comes to the floor, to offer amendments to help create more good new jobs. We've tried several times to do that, but the majority leader doesn't like for us to bring these up. For example, we'd like to offer a bill to increase from 30 to 40 hours of the work week under the health care law. That has bipartisan support, but it would change the health care law, so we can't offer that one. We'd like to offer an amendment to build the Keystone Pipeline. Well, that has 75 or so senators on both sides of the aisle, maybe more than that, who voted for it, who say they support it, but the majority leader doesn't want us to bring that one up. We'd like to have an amendment to give the president the trade promotion authority that President Obama has asked for. President Obama sees the world. He sees Asia. He's negotiating a treaty with Asia. He's negotiating a trade treaty with Europe. He would like to see more American exports go to Europe and go to Asia, which would increase jobs at home. He's asked the Congress. He stood right here at the State of the Union, asked us to approve that. The majority leader says, no, not going to bring that up. We have a Workforce Investment Act that may come up this week. We hope it will. We'd like to repeal the Obamacare individual mandate. There are a number of provisions that we'd like to bring up under more jobs. So this $1-a-day subsidy is supposed to be the keystone of the Democrats' jobs program. Well, we're ready to talk about jobs, and we'll have amendments to bring up when this comes to the floor. Or if the subject is education, we're ready to talk about education. It would certainly be a lot better if we'd put on the floor bills that have actually gone through the Education Committee. I complimented the senator from Iowa a little earlier. I've enjoyed working with him. I'm the ranking member. He's the ranking member on his side. The Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee is the most productive committee in this Senate. It has a large jurisdiction. We've passed 19 bills out in a bipartisan way. 10 of them have become law. I don't think any other committee can say that. We take our work very seriously. And we just as we're doing today on the Higher Education Act, and just as we did on trying to fix No Child Left Behind. We spent a good deal of time on No Child Left Behind. We reported a bill to the floor. We had competing proposals. Democrats want what I call a national school board, even more of one. Republicans want to reverse the trend to a national school board and send more decisions back to state and local governments. We want to fix No Child Left Behind. We have competing visions of our education future, but I voted to bring the Democratic bill to the floor so we could have a debate. The House is ready to fix No Child Left Behind. The Senate Education Committee is ready to fix No Child Left Behind. So if we want to have a debate about education this week, let's bring up a bill that's considered by the committee where we have competing proposals and fix No Child Left Behind. Better schools mean higher college graduation rates, and that means better jobs. So we're ready to offer our amendments for more good jobs. We're ready to offer our amendments for better schools. In addition to our proposal for reversing the trend toward a national school board, I have a proposal to create scholarships for kids. Did you know if you took 80 of the federal education programs and gave the states the permission to do this, that they could create a $2,100 scholarship for every low-income child in America, which would follow that child to the school of the parent's choice? We wouldn't be imposing any school choice plan on any state. We don't believe in mandates. But if a state wanted to say to a low-income child, that money can follow you to your school so they can have an after-school program or an extra teacher, a governor could do that. And Senator Scott of South Carolina has offered a similar proposal to say, let's take the federal disability money. And if you have a Down syndrome child and you found a school that fits that child's needs very well, why not allow that federal disability money to follow the child to the school the child attends? Let the parent make that choice. We're ready to offer that amendment. We have a quality charter schools provision. 5% of the schools in America are charter schools. Charter schools are schools that give teachers freedom. They give parents freedom to serve the children who are in that school. They began just 20 years ago, and they have bipartisan support. President Clinton was in Nashville not long ago announcing his support and raising money for a Nashville charter school. And then I have an amendment to stop the education secretary from becoming chairman of a national school board. States are struggling with No Child Left Behind. There's a provision in our law to allow waivers of provisions of No Child Left Behind, but this secretary, who's a fine man, a great friend, says that if you want a waiver in Oregon or Hawaii or Washington or Tennessee, you've got to do 4 or 5 things that I in Washington say. You've got to have these standards. You've got to have this sort of teacher evaluation system. I'm going to tell you what to do about that. I don't think he has the authority to do it. The American people don't want a national school board. So if we want to talk about education, we're ready with amendments on education. And if you want to introduce a class welfare tax, we're ready to talk about taxes as well. We'd like to repeal the medical device tax, and we're looking for an opportunity to offer that. So if we're going to put a tax provision on the floor, let's have a tax debate. Let's have a debate about permanent state and local tax deductions. Let's prohibit the individual tax mandate in Obamacare. Let's make permanent expensing of Section 179. Senator Thune has that proposal, and the House is acting on it this week. Let's make permanent the research and development tax credit. That has bipartisan support as well. And if the subject is just higher education, we have amendments about that as well. But Madam President, the place for these amendments, the place for this discussion is in our Senate Education Committee, where we are discussing those ideas today, discussing them today. And the way to do that this year is the way we did it last year, when the president, to his great credit, saw an opportunity to work with the Republicans in the House, came over here with a bipartisan group, and we hammered out an agreement on a very big subject that, as I said, cut nearly in half the interest rate on undergraduate student loans. So why in the world do Senate Democrats want to waste a week on a political stunt? We thought we'd ended that with student loans last year. Waste a week. We've got veterans standing in lines at clinics. We've got appropriations bills standing in line waiting to be considered here to deal with cancer research and national defense. And Democrats say, no, let's put that aside. Let's have a political stunt on higher education, even though we know it's not going anywhere. We know it's not going anywhere. I'm very disappointed by this. This is an example. This $1 a day taxpayer subsidy to some students with former loans to help them pay off a $27,000 a day with a hope that'll get some votes. I thought we had put that behind us, and it's one reason. This is one reason the American people lose confidence in the United States Senate. This body is described in a book, The American Senate, written by the Neil McNeil and the late Neil McNeil and the former historian of the Senate. It's described as the one piece of authentic genius in the American constitutional system. And why is that? Because there are 100 of us. We operate by unanimous consent. It's a place for extended debate on important issues until we reach a consensus. And our founders were so wise because they thought they had a complicated country, but it's not nearly as complex as we have today. And the only way you govern a complex country is through consensus, just as we did last year on new student loans. I would like to see the Senate move back to the place it was a few years ago, and it wasn't that long ago. Many of the members of the Senate don't know about it because so many members are new. Did you know half the members of the United States Senate have been here one term or less? So they really haven't seen the Senate operate the way it's supposed to operate. The Republican leader said that if Republicans were in charge of the Senate, he would like to operate it the way a former Democratic leader did, Senator Mike Mansfield, which was number one, let bills go through committee the way we like to do in our Education Committee. Number two, bring them to the floor for robust debate. Let people put up their ideas. The idea is the majority has the right to set the agenda, and the minority has the right to offer amendments. And then in the Senate, the idea is you have an extended discussion until you reach a consensus if you can. And the way that historically was done, I remember Senator Byrd or Senator Baker. I was here as an aide then, not as a senator. They would say to a chairman or a ranking member, bring me a bill, like they would say to Senator Harkin, bring me the Fix No Child Left Behind bill if you've got the Republican member's support. And I would say, in this case, well, he doesn't have my support, but I voted for it to get it to the floor. Okay, I'll stand there, he stands there, and we'll open it up to debate. And we'll try to amend it. We may win, we may lose, but then we send it to the House, we have a conference, it comes back, we come to a consensus. How do we get all that done? Well, the majority leader stands up on Monday and says, we're going to do Fix No Child Left Behind this week, and we're going to finish by Saturday, or we're going to finish by a week from Saturday. And you may offer all the amendments you want, but you're going to be here Saturday or Sunday, and pretty soon by about Thursday, many senators say, well, I've got a grandchild soccer game, or I might want to go home, and it regulates that way. It's never perfect. This is a place where we dispute big issues. But the idea that United States senators can't offer amendments on important issues is making this Senate into a place of trivia instead of a place where it's an authentic piece of genius. The senator from Wyoming, Senator Brasso, did some interesting research. He pointed out that since July, there have only been 9 amendments offered by Republicans that received a roll call vote. 9 amendments offered by Republicans since last July that received a roll call vote. That's like, in Tennessee, they'd say that's like being in the Grand Ole Opry and not being allowed to sing. That's what we do. We're supposed to have a say about student loans, about Iran, about Ukraine, about all these issues. We might win, we might lose, but on behalf of our constituents, we're supposed to have a say. But that's not nearly as bad. The senator from Wyoming did a little more research, and this is what he found. While Senate Republicans have had 9 amendments since last July, guess how many Senate Democrats have had? 7. 7 roll call amendments. Now, Senate Democrats have offered, according to the senator from Wyoming, 676 amendments, and the majority leader's allowed 6. 6 roll call votes since last July. How do you explain that when you go home? How do you explain a political stunt on student loans that everybody knows is a political stunt that won't pass? And how do you explain to veterans standing in lines at clinics and to appropriations members standing in lines with bills to deal with cancer research and national defense that a political stunt is more important? This is not the way the Senate's supposed to operate. But let's go back to this $1 a day stunt. It's unfair to students, it's unfair to taxpayers, it's unfair to future generations. It's unfair to students because it treats former students better than it treats current students and new students. This proposal, the Senate Democrats' proposal that's being brought to the floor this week, doesn't do a single thing for you if you're a current student or if you're going to be a student next year or the following year. It just helps some former students with old loans, and it treats them better than it would treat you if you're a new student, because it will freeze into a place, an interest rate, say 3 years from now, if you're a former student with an old loan, and if you're a new student, you've got to ride with the market, and your rate might be a little higher. The Senate Democratic proposal is unfair to taxpayers for 2 reasons. First, it increases individual income taxes by $72 billion. It's a big number. It's been rejected 8 times. It's a class warfare tax. It's just focused on a few people. And second, you may have heard it said that the government profits off the students when it comes to student loans. Well, in fact, the reverse is true. When we use the accounting system that the Congressional Budget Office says we ought to use, the student loan program actually cost taxpayers over the next 10 years $88 billion. Now, let me repeat that. You'll hear it said by the advocates of the $1 a day subsidy to help you pay off your student loan that the government's profiting over the students. Not if you use the accounting system that the Congressional Budget Office has said we should use. And what's the difference? The Congressional Budget Office says the system we do use doesn't take into account the risk that students might not pay back their loans. And today, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that 10% of student loans are in default. That proper sort of accounting system is not foreign to the Senate. We used it with the troubled asset relief program, so-called bailout, because the idea was if we're going to assess what the cost of a program would be, we wanted to take into account the risks. I have here what the Congressional Budget Office said. The Congressional Budget Office recommends that we use the fair value accounting procedures. It considers that a better methodology. It says that the student loan program, as it exists, under that accounting system will cost taxpayers $88 billion over the next 10 years. And I said the main reason is that the fair value system takes into account risk, the risk that students might not pay off some of their loans. This is the quote of the Congressional Budget Office. Now, for those who might not know about what we call the CBO, we pay this group, the CBO, to tell us the truth. They're nonpartisan. They don't always tell us what we want to hear. And we usually try to ignore it when they don't and shade something off and say, well, we heard a different point of view. But here's what they said. Under the fair value approach, estimates are based on market values, market prices when those prices are available, or approximation of market prices when directly comparable figures are unavailable, which more fully account for the cost of the risk the government takes on. In particular, the fair market approach accounts for the cost of the market risk, which the other procedure that we currently use does not. The Congressional Budget Office continues, and this is May 2014. The government is exposed to market risk when the economy is weak because borrowers default on their debt obligations more frequently and recoveries from borrowers are lower. Well, that makes sense. When the government extends credit, the associated market risk of those obligations is effectively passed on to taxpayers, who as investors would view that risk as having a cost. Therefore, the fair value approach offers a much more comprehensive estimate of federal costs. That's why last year, when the president worked in a bipartisan way with senators and with the Republican House, we came to a conclusion that didn't raise taxes, that didn't raise the debt, and that still cut rates nearly in half for undergraduates. Finally, the Senate Democratic proposal is unfair to future generations because it could add as much as $420 billion to an already out-of-control national debt. It does this by allowing private loans to be turned into public loans. Private debt becomes the government's debt. Recently, as I said, the Congressional Budget Office warned that interest on the debt in the next 10 years will rise from $227 billion to $876 billion, an amount greater than the entire cost of our nation's national defense. So this $1 a day subsidy does not justify this unfairness to other students, to taxpayers, and to future generations. Now, Madam President, let me conclude by talking about the real problem and the real solutions with student loans. Today, the President held a press conference in which he proposed issuing a regulation by executive order that he said would extend an income repayment plan to millions more students. Well, we have some questions like that. We don't know what that costs, and apparently neither does he. We know it doesn't take effect for another year or so because it takes time to figure it out. I've had a hard time figuring out, reading the law, where the president gets the authority to do this. It's based upon the Health Care Act in 2014, which included provisions about the student loans. But in the health care law, it talks about an income repayment plan that affects loans beginning July 1, 2014. And the president, both with this executive order and his 2011 executive order, speaks of loans before July 1, 2014. So we don't know the cost. It's questionable authority. And so here we are, press conference at the White House, political stunt on the Senate floor, dealing with loans. Well, we know better than that. We know how to do that. The president knows that he could sit down with those of us in the Senate who are working on student loans and in the House and say, here, I have some ideas about income repayment. And we would say, Mr. President, number one, we really respect what you did last year and would like to work with you again. And number two, you're on the right subject. Because there are two big problems, real problems, with student loans. One is the complexity of the income repayment plan. Now, the truth is, the Obama administration itself is guilty of causing most of the complexity because the plan was put in place by law in 2007, and then it was amended in 2010, and then there was a regulation in 2011, and now there's another regulation. And basically, what it started out as was to say that if you've got a student loan and you have to pay it back and you're not making much money, you don't have to pay more than 15% of your discretionary income. Now, that's not even your total income, it's just part of your income. And if you can't pay it off over 25 years, the government will forgive it. And what the bill did in 2010 was to cut that down and say, well, you only have to pay 10% of your income. And if you haven't paid it off in 20 years, the government will forgive it. That's available today for students. So let's compare what's available already today on the books, even if the president's proposal regulation today doesn't go into effect, for students. For students who want lower monthly payments on their student loans, there are already provisions in the federal law that allow the typical undergraduate to lower his or her payment by $60 more a month than the $1 a day plan from the Senate Democrats. And for the typical graduate student, the existing repayment plans could lower monthly payments by $300 a month, more than the Senate Democratic plan. And under current law, as I said, if the loan isn't paid off in 20 years, the government forgives it. So here's what we have in America today. We have $100 billion of student loans every year, $33 billion of grants, all going out to students at a very low rate. Most of the students don't have any credit history, and they don't need it to get the money. First, we hear a lot of talk about the expense of a college education, and in some colleges it is very expensive. I know I went to school I had 2 or 3 jobs, and I had a couple of scholarships. That's how I was able to go to Vanderbilt University. But for students today who want a less expensive college education, it's important for them to know that the average cost of tuition and fees at a 2-year college, and there's some excellent ones all over our country, 2-year public institution, is $3,200. The average cost of tuition and fees at a public 4-year institution, and some of the best 4-year institutions in America are public 4-year institutions, California, Tennessee, Hawaii, Washington State. These are very good universities. The average cost of tuition and fees is $8,900. And 3 out of 4 college students go to these 2-year college where the tuition and fee is $3,200, or 4-year college whether it's just under $9,000. And in addition, Madam President, 40% of those same students, the 3 out of 4 go to public colleges and universities, 40% of them have a grant, which they don't have to pay back. It's called a Pell Grant. And it may be as much as $5,600. So the truth is that for millions of college students, going to college today is free. It's free. I mean, do the math yourself. If your community college is $3,200 and you get a $5,600 Pell Grant, you've got some extra money. And you can still get a loan if you want to, and then you have even more extra money, which leads to the other real problem with student loans that we'd like to work with the president on, and that is overborrowing. The first real problem is the complexity of the income repayment plan. And we can change that. We can make that clear, just as we did last year with many of the new loans. We can make the income repayment plan working together much simpler and make it easier for students to take advantage of. But what about overborrowing? We read in the paper about these huge numbers. It seems like everybody we read about has a $300,000 loan or a $150,000 loan that they'll never be able to pay back. And I guess a few people do. But according to Mark Kantrowitz, who's a scholar who studied student debt, more than 90% of students who graduate with a loan of more than $100,000 are graduate students. You say that again. If you read about a student loan that is more than $100,000, more than 90% of those are for graduate students. And we've just said a moment ago that undergraduate students can earn more than $1 million in their lifetime with their four-year degree. Doctors, lawyers, other graduate students can earn a lot more than that with their advanced degree in many cases. But of those graduate students who have those more than $100,000 loans, that's only 6% of the whole amount of graduate students, and it's only 2% of all the loans. So 2% of all the student loans in the country that are federal government loans are more than $100,000. And the average undergraduate loan for a four-year degree is $27,000, and for all undergraduate loans, which is 85% of the loans, is $21,000. Now, there is some overborrowing even among undergraduates. Young people are, and maybe they're not all young, are borrowing more than they can afford to pay back. And in our committee, we're considering a number of proposals to deal with that, both for graduate and undergraduate loans. For example, we'd like to simplify the student loan program so more students could take advantage of it and take advantage of the repayment options that exist in the law today. But we need to know how much that costs the taxpayers. Need to know. Number two, we've been talking about eliminating the Graduate Plus program that provides virtually unlimited loans to graduate students, regardless of their credit history. That may be how they got to these loans that we read about occasionally, $150,000, $200. We want to prohibit part-time students from taking out the same amount of loans that full-time students can. Let's say you're taking a half-time load at a four-year institution, and you take out a full loan to pay for that. That means you have some extra money for living expenses or for a car or for some other living. I'm not sure that what we want to do as a matter of national policy is loan as part of this program money for expenses other than education and costs associated with education. And we like to give colleges and universities the ability to require counseling of students who borrow $100 billion a year. Did you know that under the current law, a college is prohibited from saying to me, if I'm an entering student at Vanderbilt and I want, or University of Tennessee, and I say, give me my loan, I'm entitled to it. You know, the college is prohibited from requiring me to have some financial counseling about whether I can pay that back or not. I'm 18, 19 years old. I have no credit history, maybe not much experience with money. And the college that hands me the money is prohibited by us from requiring counseling. And we may want to limit the amount that a student can borrow. We may want to allow colleges to have a role in doing that. We may even, and this has been suggested, require higher education institutions in some instances to have skin in the game to ensure that graduate students and undergraduate students repay their loan. In other words, the higher education institution would have part of the risk. Those are some of the ideas that are being considered today in the Senate Education Committee. So, Madam President, every senator has a right to bring onto this floor whatever she or he wants to bring on. It's up to the majority leader to decide what we focus our precious time on. I'm here today to suggest that a $1 a day subsidy for college graduates to help them pay off a $27,000 loan, which is the average loan for a four-year college graduate, which is almost exactly the same as the average car loan, is not a worthy subject for our discussion this week when we've got veterans standing in lines at clinics and appropriations bills dealing with cancer and national military defense waiting to come on the floor. And that's especially true when we have a president of the United States who's proved he can work with Congress on student debt. He did that last year. He did a good job. He was very helpful to the final result. The Republicans in the House said that. We said that in a bipartisan way. And I think most students who are enjoying the benefit of that would agree with that. So we thought last year, Madam President, we had stopped the political stunts on student loans. We put a market price system on all new loans at no new cost to the taxpayers, at no new debt, so that this wouldn't become an election year football, but apparently it has at least for a week. So we're going to have to endure going on to the floor and talking about a proposal that every single senator knows has no chance not only of getting to the House, which won't touch it, but even passing the Senate. No chance whatsoever. And why? Because over in the Senate Education Committee, we're discussing this subject in a bipartisan way, in the way we're supposed to do it. So if it comes to the floor, we're ready to amend it. We've got our proposals for more good jobs. College graduates don't need a $1 a day subsidy to help pay off a $27,000 loan. They need a good, decent job, and we're ready to help them get one. With the Keystone Pipeline, with the trade authority that the president wants, with lower taxes, with changes in Obamacare, with going from a 30 to a 40-hour work week, we have a lot of ideas about that. If we want to bring up taxes, which this proposal does, we've got some taxes that we'd like to bring up as well. And that includes repealing the medical device tax, which ought to have a good bipartisan vote here in the Senate. It has before. And on education, we've got our ideas too, and so do the Democrats, by the way. Those have been through committee. They've been hashed out. They're ready for the floors. There's a competing vision. Democrats want a national school board. We want to reverse the trend to a national school board. So on this bill, if we want to talk about education, I'd like to have a chance to introduce my amendment that says no national school board. Let's send those decisions back to state and local governments, and I think there are lots of senators on both sides of the aisle who would like to vote for that. But Madam President, what I would really like to see is the president accept our invitation to work with him. That's what we'd like to do. We did that last year. We got a good result. He's put his focus in the right place. I might say respectfully, maybe he's in the right church but the wrong pew. He's talking about income repayment plans. We think that's one of the big problems left to solve. And we'll work with him to simplify those and to reform those. But we want to make sure that the government has clear legislative authority to do it, and we want to know what it costs. And then we'd like to work with him on excessive overborrowing. And I would suspect that he would like to do that too. So why don't we do that? Why don't we send this $1 a day proposal back to the Senate Education Committee? Actually, it never was there. But let's send it to the Senate Education Committee. Put it in with all the other ideas we're discussing. Let's continue our work in that committee in a bipartisan way, 10 hearings, to see if we can this year reauthorize or present to the Senate a proposal for reauthorizing the Higher Education Act. And let's use this time for the veterans standing in line, or the appropriations bills, which deal with so many issues in which we haven't had a chance to consider for the last few years. So I'm disappointed with today's press conference at the White House and the political stunt that's headed toward the Senate floor. But I'm hoping that the president will take a look at what he did last year and feel a good deal of satisfaction about it and say, let me sit down with those same men and women that I worked with last year and see if we can't do something about simplifying income repayment so more students can take advantage of it, and dealing with excessive borrowing and some of the other issues that we're working on in education. I think we can do that 2 years in a row, and I think the American people would appreciate it if we tried. I thank the President. I yield the floor.